everybody, I'm Kate Cass, and welcome to our edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about the Milo Murphy's Law and Phineas and Ferb crossover. Around this time last year, I reviewed the first season of the Disney animated series Milo Murphy's Law, a season which ended on a cliffhanger that was meant to lead into a crossover with the creator's previous successful series, Phineas and Ferb. A reveal that was so game-changing and shocking, I didn't even notice this glaring animation error until recently. Much like that season, the review ended with me saying I'd talk about that special as well. And here I am, a year later, ready to review it. I am sorry, I didn't mean for it to be this long between reviews on this show. I actually planned to do this sometime last summer since we were entering the realm of the stepbrothers who pretty much own summer, but, well, some other projects I had got bigger than I expected and thus took priority. Hey, at least I didn't wait as long in between reviews as Disney did between the setup for this crossover and the actual event. Seriously, trying to figure out when the special was going to come out was a mystery even Sherlock Holmes couldn't crack at the time. There were tons of conflicting reports from Disney and staff on the show, the date kept being pushed back. It was even released in other countries before it aired in the States. So if you were part of any fandom space on the internet who enjoyed the show, you had to tread very carefully if you wanted to avoid spoilers. And by that point, there still wasn't a solid release date.
When will the movie be released? When is Life released?
This was supposed to be the Disney Channel's biggest crossover since Mission Marvel, and nobody knew when it was going to be on. Eventually, the date was finally set, January of 2019. Almost a year and a half after the season 1 finale aired, and a little over a year since the last new episode of Milo Murphy's Law. It was frustrating to say the least, but we're here now. Thankfully, the episode opens with Dr. Doofenshmirtz giving us a recap of Fungus Among Us, which was helpful given how long it had been. So, let's pick up where we left off and head back to Danville as it's being destroyed for the gajillionth time to study the Phineas and Ferb Effect. When we last left our band of misfits, they were setting out to recruit the future Professor Time, who actually does turn out to be former Phineas and Ferb baddie Heinz Doofenshmirtz, to help them go back in time to prevent the invasion by the Pistachions taking over Danville. While the B-team band together to get that done, with varying levels of success, Milo reunites with his friends who have made some familiar allies of their own, who know what they're going to do today. Stop these plans from turning their friends and families into monstrous nuts. Before we dive into the actual events of the story, let's talk a bit about crossovers. A prospect that is either really fun or really annoying depending on who you ask. Some people find crossovers to be a fun experiment, giving creatives a chance to play around with two different worlds coming together and interacting, which is where I tend to fall, by the way. Some can be turned off based on what properties are crossing over, because there have been some weird ones over the years that are mocked on pitch alone. Some people just don't like crossovers because they tend to distract from what they're here to enjoy, especially since they tend to halt the story in its tracks or derail the main story so they can happen. However, the Phineas and Ferb Effect is in a bit of a unique position in my eyes. Even the most well thought out and constructed crossovers, like say whenever the Arrowverse shows come together, are usually coordinating among different creative teams and several other factors, even when it takes less work to cross them over. But in this case, Phineas and Ferb and Milo Murphy's Law were created and shaped by largely the same exact people, so combining the two didn't feel like much of a stretch to accomplish like some crossovers can. In fact, it felt incredibly natural since, as explained in my review of the first season, the show's writing and humor was very similar to its predecessor. And as the events of this crossover unfold, it's clear that this was the plan for the story of Milo Murphy's Law for a long time now. Therefore, the groundwork to make this all possible has been laid down for a while, so the events feel more like a natural occurrence in the Milo Murphy's Law storyline rather than a distraction. I think the only negative trait of crossovers this special has is characters constantly introducing themselves to each other, especially during the first half where characters are rotating around a lot in a very massive combined cast. But for the most part, because these worlds are so similar already and were brought to life by the same group of people, it helps these similar yet somewhat different shows blend both the antics of Phineas and Ferb and the continuing storyline of Milo Murphy's Law. And references. Lots of references. There are so many Easter eggs and references to Phineas and Ferb with this special, especially now that it's not a secret anymore that these shows take place in the same city. I can't possibly go through all of them. I'll just direct you to the Second Dimensions channel again. That guy is a living encyclopedia on both of these shows. I will say that possibly my favorite joke in the special is when Dakota points out how annoying Doofenshmirtz's voice is when they are both voiced by co-creator Dan Povenmire.
Is that supposed to be me?
Yeah, that's you. Your voice is really annoying.
How very meta of you, sir. While we do eventually settle into two solid groups of characters for a majority of the special, there are some great antics as these groups slowly start to cross paths. At the beginning, we pick up right where Fungus Among Us left off, with Cavendish and Dakota explaining that Doofenshmirtz is indeed Professor Time. I'm gonna be honest, I thought them winding up at Deuce Place was a big misunderstanding, but nope. It turns out that 15 years in the future, Doofenshmirtz will invent time travel. I'll go more into this later, but in terms of the reveal, I kinda love how it embraces Phineas and Ferb's weird form of continuity. On the one hand, it's far enough in the future so it doesn't contradict actor age, and it plays on Doofenshmirtz turning good at the end of the series. On the other hand, this whole meeting occurs because the gang need a time machine, and somehow, this special, and Milo Murphy's Law as a whole for that matter, never acknowledges the very functional time machine at the museum. That's still there, right? I checked, and it was still intact in both episodes it was featured in. Well, maybe Deuce method is more stable, or commercially viable, or he got dibs on the patent or something, I don't know. Either way, it leads to some of those amazing and entertaining exchanges between the crossed over characters. A highlight with both of these shows is their dialogue, and this special really delivers in that respect. Not just with Doof, although his lines are definitely a highlight, but there's also when Melissa and Zach run into Buford and Baljeet in Lardworld Plant Jail. You know, I'm starting to think these shows are kind of weird. I really like that they run into them doing recon on the crisis. It's one of those details to remind you that these kids have seen weirder than this and are more focused on solving the problem than being freaked out. It's a nice way to get reacquainted with Buford and Baljeet. But let's face it, that's not the part everyone remembers from this scene. This is. Yes, it's funny that they're using Milo Murphy's Law's catchiest song as a distraction. Yes, it's cool that the Phineas and Ferb characters recognize Zach as a former boy band star, making more connections between these two worlds. And yes, it's funny when Baljeet jumps in and takes it over. All that is great, but did he seriously have to dab? That almost ruined it for me. You're lucky the rest of it was funny, show. Later, they run into Candace. Not captured by the Pistachions, they manage to escape by that point, but by running into her as she wanders the streets playing a Ducky Momo Pokemon Go clone. I remember some criticism with this joke, saying it was dated, but Pokemon Go is still kicking, and some of us didn't stop playing just because it isn't trendy anymore. What I'm saying is, there's a lot of great team-ups and introductions in this special. My personal favorite might be when Perry drops it and teams up with Milo to retrieve a piece they need for the time machine. It's so weird, but also really cool. I loved it. Though another exchange I really love was Doofenshmirtz being suspicious of Diogi, because it was a really popular fan theory at the time that Diogi was an agent with the organization without a cool acronym. This is the kind of moment that does something amazing. Pretty much debunks it while also feeding on the skeptical fans who considered this a misdirect or even a hint.
Oh, he's just a dog. Yeah, as far as you know.
Season 2 would basically go on to say, no, he's just a dog, and honestly, I kind of preferred that. Making him a secret agent would have been so obvious. But at the time, this moment made me laugh so loud for so many different reasons. But of course, they saved the biggest character entrance for last. I kind of admire the restraint from the crew to wait until right before the first ad break to bring in the headliners of this crossover. It was the epic reintroduction these brothers deserved. I'm gonna be totally honest with you guys. I love Phineas and Ferb the show. I really do. It's a brilliantly written series. But by the time it was coming to a close, I was ready for it to end. To me, the show was getting dangerously close to overstaying its welcome. So in hindsight, it really speaks to the power of these characters when I was so excited to see them again when it had only been about 3 years since their curtain call episode. By this point, the two groups of A-plot and B-plot characters are formed and pretty much stay that way until the big final battle. So let's split things up here and talk about how each team is handling their mission to stop the Pistachions. With our titular characters, most of their time is spent coming up with a strategy to fight off this army while quickly realizing Milo's little Problem: processing the roadblock that is Murphy's Law makes up a majority of this plotline. It was kind of interesting to see these familiar characters process all this new information that we've been privy to for a while now. Because it's such a fact of life around Milo, nobody really questions it. Everyone pretty much knows the drill and reacts accordingly. Each member of the Phineas and Ferb gang have different responses to Murphy's Law. Baljeet, being the scientific one, wants to study this unusual phenomenon. Buford, being the destructive one, wants to weaponize it. Phineas wants to figure out how to include Milo, ever the problem solver who wants to include everyone, and Candace just wants to ditch him, which is a little mean, but makes perfect sense for Candace the control freak, and she's as nice as she possibly can be about it. She quickly realizes, though, how Milo is not only prepared for almost any eventuality, but that the chaos he causes can actually be a good thing, at least when it comes to fighting off a living plant invasion. Something that's not only pretty well set up thanks to Candace, but is alluded to earlier in the episode when Melissa uses the Murphy's Law Milo's dad causes to get them out of captivity, leading to the group studying Milo to figure out why he attracts such bad luck. You'd think breaking down exactly how this Murphy's Law thing works would take away some of the fun of it, midichlorian style, but explaining that Murphy's Law is a universal force is not only great cartoon logic, but becomes an essential piece of the world building for later in the series. It's pretty impressive how the show planted the seeds for future stories. It's such a shame that it's not more appreciated. But the thing I found very interesting about these two groups coming together and discovering how their differences can work as one is how it displays what makes these sets of protagonists so similar despite their vastly different lifestyles. Phineas, Ferb, and Milo have very similar personalities, outgoing, resourceful, and optimistic, but they keep these demeanors under very different circumstances. With Phineas and Ferb, it's because everything goes right with them, and with Milo, it's despite the fact that everything goes wrong. It's those opposing lifestyles from like-minded kids that leads to the solution that saves the day, with the discovery of the opposite force to Murphy's Law, the Phineas and Ferb Effect. Apparently, Phineas and Ferb emanate a similar force to Milo's, except for them, it makes everything work out just fine. Oh my god, Candace was right, there is a mysterious force. It certainly explains a lot in their adventures, and once again embodies the contrast between these two shows and sets of characters, even if, to me anyway, there are a couple of contradictions.
What do you usually do when things go wrong?
We have no frame of reference for that.
Oh really, Phineas? I think Mission Marvel and Summer Belongs to You would beg to differ. It's a funny line, but I'm just saying. While our group of ambitious minors work on weaponizing the very force of the universe tied to their beings, let's check in on the B team, who, with Dr. Doofenshmirtz's time machine, are attempting to go back and stop the invasion before it even starts. But because Heinz Doofenshmirtz is the one in charge here, there's one disaster and distraction after the other. Like usual, Doofenshmirtz goes from being a great joke machine to being one of the most well-developed characters in the episode, because he's not just Doofenshmirtz anymore, he's also Professor Time, or at least he is to everyone around him right now, besides Perry, who's just kinda tagging along at this point. Cavendish in particular really gets frustrated with Doofenshmirtz, not just because of how much he keeps ruining their mission, but because of the disillusionment he's feeling, realizing that this man is supposed to be his hero. The man who created the technology that shaped his future civilization and made the profession he's dedicated his life to possible. But he's also the man who invented the time machine they're using so he can pick up a discontinued soda and sacrifice essential navigating tools to make room for the cup holder. Now, anyone who's familiar with Phineas and Ferb knows that that makes complete sense for Doof, as does him using these situations they find themselves in to dream up premises for sitcoms, which, let's be honest, we'd all totally watch. Kai, could you imagine Dr. Doofenshmirtz in a WandaVision scenario? That'd be insane. Anyway, most of this is just Doof being Doof, but now he's faced with the pressure of living up to a legacy that he hasn't even built yet, which fittingly is something he has in common with Orton Molson, the creator and star of Dr. Zone, who the gang dragged along on this adventure back in Fungus Among Us. He spent most of his time standing in the background taking notes of what's been going on to get inspiration for his new show, but he has a small aside with Doofenshmirtz at one point to say that he knows how he feels. The pressure to create this show that will have such a huge legacy when he hasn't even even filmed a single episode yet. I really like this commonality between Doof and Orton. This pressure to know ahead of time that you're going to do something great and inspirational, but you haven't grown enough yet to become that person so many will look up to. I'm not sure how relatable that is, but if you're going to tell any story with time travel, that's a good one. Also comes with a pretty great song. The beginning is sweet and thematic. The rap section I don't love, I'm gonna be honest, but it's pretty funny. All the songs in this special are pretty great, which is no surprise from this team. The Quirky Worky song from Phineas and Ferb makes a return, and How Do I Do It is really catchy. The Pressure song is still my favorite though. While those two are having their little musical heart-to-heart, Dakota discovers that the island they crashed on is the Lost Dakota Island. Yeah, this was something I probably should have mentioned in the last video. One of the most well-known episodes from season 1 was Island of the Lost Dakotas, where it was revealed that Dakota has gone back in time dozens if not hundreds of times to save Cavendish's life, and the time-displaced duplicates of Dakota that creates are sent to live on a desert island. Cavendish is outraged to discover this at first, but once he processes all of the trouble Dakota went through for him, it actually turns into a really sweet moment. These two may be reluctant partners and complete opposites when it comes to personality and approach, but they do care about each other, and I'd argue this is the first moment of us really seeing that from both sides, outside of maybe the Christmas episode. It's really nice, and don't worry, we'll see much more of this in season 2. For now, it's time to talk about the final showdown. In the spirit of both of these shows, it brings everything we've seen up to this point together and throws it at the wall in a barrage of organized chaos, and it's awesome. Implementing every tactical advantage gathered from both plots. Milo, Phineas and Ferb's giant Murphy's Law causing robot, bringing in the Lost Dakotas as an army, even Doofenshmirtz's ridiculous search for a discontinued soda becomes an essential piece to taking down the Pistachions. This final battle is, no pun intended, nuts. Utilizing as many Phineas and Ferb and Milo Murphy's Law characters as possible to work together, with the main ones each getting a moment to shine or a funny aside, including Isabella, who finally decides to show up. Wow, they really held off on bringing her in. Well, it looks like she was doing some badass stuff in the background, so that's a fair compromise, I suppose. Though strangely, Vanessa is completely absent from this. She's not even in a background shot. Ah well. When we heard there was going to be a crossover between these shows, I think this was the sort of thing a lot of people imagined. Absurd yet well-woven plot points with an abundance of references and fantastic dialogue in between the chaos. My personal favorite moment during this big battle is when that giant Pistachion sees the cruelties of war as he's about to crush everyone, seeing the error of his ways, and then goes off to perform community service. That was priceless. But even with all the tools at their disposal, our heroes find themselves overwhelmed against their supporting cast who have all now been turned into carnivorous cashews. All seems lost until the two who doubted themselves the most rise to the occasion and stop this where it all began. For Doofenshmirtz, it's the moment where he first finds that determination to begin that journey of becoming a good guy, the path that will lead to Professor Time. And because of that, him and everyone else get to see with their own eyes who he will be. And I know I made a joke about them forgetting the original time machine in the Danville Museum, but his time machine does bear quite the resemblance to it, so that's pretty cool. But right alongside Professor Time, Orton also comes into who he was always meant to be, the one and only Dr. Zone, as we've seen the pieces collected in the background of these chaotic events. You see, the first plan of the Pistachion that started all this, Derek, was to replace Orton and take the nerd-fueled empire of Dr. Zone for himself. But because it didn't have Orton at the helm, the show was cancelled after 2 episodes. There are hints to the fact that no one remembers Dr. Zone throughout this special and the season 1 finale, including Time Ape no longer being on Sarah's shirt, which doesn't seem like that big a deal until you realize that Dr. Zone is being conceived by its intended creator at the exact same time. Orton has no idea how to create a science fiction hero when we first meet him, he only writes what he knows. But after this experience, he knows how to be a hero, from seeing the bravery, ingenuity, and fashion sense of those he tagged along with, which makes him able to deliver the final blow of this conflict himself alongside Doofenshmirtz. It's no wonder he would create a fictional hero that would entertain and inspire viewers for so long. Just look at the circumstances he was conceptualized in. For one outlandish afternoon, Orton got to live and succeed as Dr. Zone, starting a ripple effect that winds up becoming integral to inspiring greater things. You don't have to look any further than the outfits to see how much Dr. Doctor's own effects things, an outfit that was inspired by Cavendish, and later Doofenshmirtz's Professor Time getup draws clear influence from the Doctor's own outfit. And given that Cavendish is such a huge fan of Professor Time, is likely why he dresses like that in the first place. I think this is the most timey-wimey the show ever gets, and I love it.
Timey what? Timey-wimey?
I've no idea where he picks that stuff up.
The only downside to Orton's subplot is that we never see him again after this, despite the fact that his older present-day self still lives in Danville, which is such a shame because I would have loved to have seen more with him. The Pistachions are destroyed, everyone is restored to their normal selves, except for Bradley for some reason, and all is well. Hooray! Everyone parts ways having made a few new friends, except for Doofenshmirtz since his building was destroyed, so he's gonna stick around on Milo's side of town for a while. For now though, overall, the Phineas and Ferb Effect is exactly what I would have wanted from a crossover between these two shows, and maybe even a bit more. Like I've emphasized here and in the season 1 video, this was an event that was anticipated for a long time, to the point that it would have been easy for it to be disappointing once it finally did get here. But as far as I can tell, it was very positively received. The events found creative ways to utilize the cast, so for the most part, it felt like no one was left out. The story is extremely well woven, with the right amount of cause and effect shenanigans that when you're going through it with a fine-tooth comb, you can find more connected plot threads than loose ends. The writing and interactions are so funny and sprinkled with that same snappy charm that's made both of these shows stand out, and generally, it was just a big, well-written, fun adventure worth bringing these two shows together. You can tell how much the crew loved merging these worlds, with tons of references and quite a few fun combinations of characters. Some obvious and some not. It has the fun and absurd dual circumstances of Phineas and Ferb, and the well-planned world-building and story progression of Milo Murphy's Law, to the point that this crossover is not an isolated incident. A lot of crossovers are very self-contained. They utilize a lot from both properties, but they tend not to affect things after the credits roll. But Dan and Swampy were like, flag that nonsense, and decided to have this crossover have long-lasting effects on Milo Murphy's Law, which is really interesting, but you know what that means. I'm gonna have to review season 2 now. Woo! When will I do that?
I don't know.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what you thought of this crossover in the comments below. That's why this series is called Let's Talk About. I want to give a very special thanks to my patrons who help support my content, including David L. Sproul, Sebastian Canino of Cinemageddon Reviews, Chelsea A. Crandall, Hawk Hero, and Krolus. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my social media if you'd like to follow me on any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys next time.